Hi, I'm Troy with IGC Realty and Rental Management, a real estate investment firm located here in Melbourne, Florida, and serving the Space Coast between Titusville and Vero Beach. Now, you may recall last week's video where we started in on a Tenplex property that we'd taken over for an owner that honestly is one of the cases, the most serious cases of mismanagement I have seen in my 30-year career. Now, believe me, I could tell you some stories of mismanagement, but this particular owner's story really broke my heart. Now, you saw some of the condition that existed when we took over the property. So this week, I'm going to dive into some of the numbers, look at some of the actual losses of revenue that this owner had suffered over the last year because of the mismanagement. But I'm also going to look at the estimated repair expenses that it took to make this property ready. Now, with the repair expenses, we did round them off for example's sake, and because of some litigation on this property, I'm obviously going to hide and not disclose the names of the owners, the former manager, the tenants, or anything else. I will tell you this. The former manager has lost his real estate license. He has faced a fine by the Division of Real Estate for the state of Florida, and he is undergoing criminal investigation. There's a lot of very serious issues that were uncovered with this. What I want you to learn from this is, one, how you can take advantage of this as an investor and find a mismanaged property that you can use to increase your income and grow your portfolio. And two, how to find a good property manager so that this does not happen to you. Now, when we take a look at this particular property, you recall last week we started sharing with you some of the photos and the conditions that existed in this unit. And I believe I also told you that 7 days after us taking it over, we received a call from an inspector from the Florida Division of Hotels regarding the license that the state requires on a multifamily property. We found that license had not been paid in 2 years, so it's serious delinquent. There's overdue fines and penalties, all because the former manager had ignored his responsibility to maintain this license. Now, we got that call 7 days after officially stepping into the position as a new manager. And when we started talking to the inspector, she quickly agreed to remove the fines and the penalties as long as we paid to bring the license current, which we did that very same day. We also had a list of violations that we had to deal with. Some of the most serious were the broken rungs on the stairwell that were broken out by the homeless individual that had set up residency underneath the stairs. That is probably one of the worst things that could have happened to that property because it really established a complete negative presence for any of the few good residents that we had there. Well, thankfully, the Division of Hotels and the inspector worked with us. We were able to get those things cured, and we were able to get them cured quickly. So we fixed the damaged stair rungs, we got the grounds cleaned up, and then we began work on the tenants. Now, this is a process we had to go through as a professional property manager. We had 10 units. A couple of them were vacant and abandoned. And a couple of them were good tenants we wanted to keep. But to really determine who we wanted to keep and who we needed to get rid of, that required us as a team going to the property, meeting with the individual residents, doing a survey of the condition of each unit, and of course the attitude and viability of each tenant, and then deciding who could be kept and saved and who needed to get rid of for the peace and sanctity of the entire community. When you've got a small property like this, one bad tenant can ruin it for everybody. One bad tenant can destroy your cash flow on the entire building. Unfortunately, when we took this property over, we had maybe 1 or 2 good tenants. That was about it. The rest of them were bad. So that kind of depicts the condition that we took over. Now, you saw pictures of Unit 101 last week, and maybe a quick refresher on the condition that it looked like. And although you can't smell it across the video, you can imagine the smell that was in there. And I've smelled some pretty bad smells walking into some ugly properties, and this still ranks up there. When we came into Unit 101, we were told that there was no rent collected on that for a year. So that means the owner has lost revenue of $9,000 in unrealized income over that one single unit in the prior year. Now, the former manager was telling the owner he couldn't collect rent because of COVID. The truth is he was using COVID as an excuse to not pay rent to the owner, and we did uncover evidence that Some of the residents had actually made small cash payments directly to this manager. He was dumb enough to write them a receipt and then not pay the owner, which meant he was guilty of embezzling rents. That's a felony charge. It's also a felony charge when you use a national disaster like the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse to not perform your duties. So he's in a lot of trouble as the investigation continues, but that doesn't put the money back in the pocket of the owners. So on this particular unit, they had $9,000 in lost revenue. There was about an $800 expense just to trash it out, just to get the debris out. And then to make it ready, they had to spend nearly $5,000, about $4,850. So this one unit had a loss as a result of this 1 year of bad management of nearly $15,000, $14,650. That is a very significant loss on one unit. We still have 9 more to go. So let's keep taking a look at these individual units. Now, Unit 102, upon first assessment, we decided that this was a fairly good tenant. They seemed somewhat stable. They needed to be kept. Now, they were in kind of a slow pay mode, and they were on assistance with the assistance programs that were helping people pay rent during the pandemic. This, unfortunately for this tenant, became an excuse, and they learned to pay their money elsewhere and not pay the rent. We eventually had to get rid of them, but for the most part, they still kept paying. Now, when we took it over, they were current with the rent, and the assistance program was keeping it up and did so for about 6 or 7 months after we took it over, and then we finally had to get rid of the tenant, replace it with somebody else, because we found once we cleaned up all the other units, this one renter that we thought was good actually turned out to be the worst one, and we had to get rid of them. But when you're first assessing a bad condition, you want to minimize the impact by maximizing the cash flow. So we hung on to this tenant for a while because the income was coming in, and when the problems showed up later, we got rid of them. But still, they left the unit in good condition, so all it needed was cleaned up and turned around, and we really just had some minor neglected maintenance issues that we had to fix, and that was about $400. That's minor in cost compared to some of the other units, but still it's neglected maintenance that shouldn't have been there, and it could have resulted in higher costs than it did. So we're very fortunate that this unit only cost about $400 to keep and put in service. Now we take a look at Unit 103. This was one of our more problem units. It was really illegally occupied, and I say it was illegally occupied because the individual in there had a lease once upon a year or two ago. But the lease was not renewed. In fact, the lease was terminated, but the individual never moved, and the former manager never took action to make them move. So the person that's living in this unit has no utilities on. So they couldn't turn on water because they didn't have a lease. And the city will not turn on water for somebody who doesn't have legal right to occupy the property. So they're in this unit with no water, and they've pirated power because they weren't even paying power. They were using extension cords to try to hijack from neighboring units and bring in what they could. So with no air conditioning, the humid heat conditions we had in Florida, and here we are at the beginning of July, which is the peak of our summertime, this unit was terrible. It was nasty, it was stinky. They had tried cooking on weird appliances that don't plug into electric sockets in the kitchen, like homemade barbecue grills and things like this. So the inside was really a mess. Now, to really complicate this issue, I know there was drug traffic that went on in this unit, and the resident was involved in prostitution. That's right, she was trying to trick herself on the corner out there and bring all her Johns, or whatever you call them, back into her unit. So that was a lot of undesirable traffic that's coming into Unit 103. Now, the ledger we were handed by the former manager showed an unpaid rent balance of $9,100. So that's $9,100 in unrealized revenue that was not collected. It was $9,100 not just in lost revenue from this tenant, but lost revenue that could have happened from another tenant had the former manager actually done his professional duty and vacated this tenant once the lease was terminated. But they didn't, so $9,100 in loss. Now, because they had let this go on so long, we had to bring our attorney and do an eviction. Eviction cost on this unit were about $560. They left quite a mess behind, a lot of debris, a lot of stuff that smelled, so we had about $800 in trash out cost, and then $4,250 to fix it. So lost revenue on this one unit, $14,710. Now that's 3, and we still have 7 units to go. You see how seriously this starts to add up? And I'll remind you, as I'm looking at the lost revenue on this, we're counting lost rents that had happened during the year the previous manager had this property in his inventory. We're not looking at just the actual expenses we took to put it into service. You could deduct out lost rents, look at actual expenses to put it back into service, and it was an investment well made by the owner to get it cash flowing again. But I'm a little ahead of myself, so let's keep going. Unit 104, when we did this assessment, we found that this was probably the best, most stable tenant that we had out of all 10 units. Older gentleman, very settled in life, very calm, very quiet, very agreeable, very easy to get along with. He had friends in the neighborhood who started calling us as soon as we took it over to really stick up for him and complain about some of the tenants that were around there that were kind of bringing the whole neighborhood down. So this guy, current on his rents, we were able to keep him in there. He's still with us. A couple of very minor maintenance issues that cost about $250 to fix. And I mean minor maintenance issues, dripping faucets and things like that, that could have been major, but fortunately we caught him at the time that we took over and were able to get them corrected right away. And he's still with us. In Unit 105, these particular tenants are also still with us. A very quiet couple, very relaxed, somewhat retired. They keep an eye on the place, so I know if anything's going on, these particular residents are willing to share with us all the details because they're there most all day, every day, watching the place. They've commented many times how much they appreciate how quiet the community is now that we've taken over. They get along better with all the residents because there's good people in there. They don't have the drug traffic or the prostitution traffic that was there when we took over, and they feel much more at peace when they're there. Now, believe me, that makes us here at IGC and our owners very happy. Our owners came to us originally with the idea that any property they own needed to be a quality property because they wanted to provide quality housing for their residents. We feel the same way. So it really made us feel good when the residents at Unit 105 told us how much more they enjoyed living there now that the place has been cleaned up and the crime is gone. That really told us we did a good job here. We go upstairs to Unit 201. Now, when we first took this property over, we were told by the owners that this unit was vacant. When we walked this property with the former manager, he never told us anybody was in this unit, so we had the assumption it was vacant. When we took it over, we went to go get into this unit and see what it took to make it rent ready. And what we found out is it's occupied. It's occupied, and the gentleman who's in there produces a lease. Now, it was a forged lease, and it was dated April 1st, which was a few months before we took over. But here's where it got interesting. It wasn't forged by the tenant, it was forged by the property manager. When I say forged, I mean he digitally signed it. He signed it as the owner and he signed it as the tenant from the same exact IP address within 60 to 90 seconds of each other. So the property manager forged the lease, and he forged it a month and a half after this tenant was supposed to have moved in. Now, there's no record of any rents ever being collected. And the forged lease said he didn't even owe a security deposit for 2 months after we took it over. Needless to say, that security deposit was never collected, rent was never collected, so we had uncollected rent stewing on this. Now, to make it worse, there was obvious drug traffic coming in and out of this unit. This is the unit I told you I could sit in the parking lot and count the number of drug deals that would happen each and every hour. As a new car would pull up, somebody would run out of this unit downstairs to that new car, do the 30-second little thing at the window, the car would screech out of the parking lot, and the guy would run upstairs and wait for the next person to come to make the delivery. So obvious drug traffic that was happening there, and no rents being paid. So we look at unrealized rents. There was $2,400 in uncollected rents from the time the forged lease started to the day we took over. It took us 2 months to get him out, so there's another $1,600 in lost revenue there. Eviction costs were $590. We had trash out costs of $950, and I should add, I think that was cheap because this apartment, when we cleaned it out, was one of the worst smells you could imagine. He left rotted, rancid meat in the refrigerator with power off in the middle of August in our Florida summer. It smelled so bad we had to trash the appliances, we had to rip out the flooring. It was terrible. It cost $6,500 to redo this unit. Some of that was odor remediation, the appliances had to be replaced, and the damages that happened were just unbelievable. So that's a lot of money to spend on a one-bedroom apartment. A lot of money. But it was necessary in this case. So the total losses on this unit were $12,040. You see how this really starts to add up. Bad management doesn't just hurt you, it hurts the tenants. Unit 202 was another issue. Now, when I would pull up to Unit 202, I never actually met the people who were supposed to be on the lease. I did meet all the guys that were hanging around, and they'd come up to me as the new manager, and they'd promise to pay rent and ask how much the rent was and everything like they intended to pay. But all they were really trying to do was get me to quiet down and leave them alone, which of course we couldn't do that. We had to get rid of them. The balance due when we took it over was $3,900. We had to add another $1,886 to that in uncollected rent to the day of eviction. $590 was the cost to evict them. Trash out cost with all the abandoned furniture, ugly food, and everything else that was left was about $1,000. And another $4,500 to make it rent ready again so we could put a good tenant in there. So the losses on this unit, $11,876. Now, Unit 203 was occupied. They were a good tenant, a little bit of a slow pay. And they had become very comfortable with their slow pay, and that's because the former manager wasn't doing anything to really enforce it. Now, when we stepped in, we immediately started doing written rental agreements with them, payment arrangements to get them to pay, and we held them to it. They've become great tenants. We've renewed a lease with them, put them under our lease with stricter guidelines, rules for the community, and we've still got them in there, and their payment history is very consistent now. So we worked with them to get them caught up, and then once we got them caught up, we've kept them on track, and we've continued to work with them. They're good people, so that's 3 out of 10 units so far we've been able to keep. But only 3 out of 10. Those aren't real good odds, and that's not what you want from your manager. You want 10 out of 10 to be worth keeping. Now we take a look at Unit 204. Another good tenant. This young lady happened to be Section 8. She had just had a new baby, so she was looking for a larger unit. She finished her lease. She cleaned the place up, she moved on, so she fulfilled her lease, moved, no balance owed, everything was good. We were able to clean this property up and put it back out for rent with minimal expenses. It was just a normal turn to make it rent ready again. But then there's Unit 205. This was another problem unit. When we walked it with the original manager just before taking over, he told us that it had been abandoned, that the people had left. Although when you walked inside, there's still furniture in place. There's still a big 4-post bedroom set, big expensive master bedroom set. There's still sofa and love seat. In fact, at first glance, I looked at the picture of the sofa that you can see that it looks like there's somebody sleeping under a sheet on the couch, but it was really just the disarray of the cushions that was on there. It wasn't a body, so thankfully for that. But it was a mess to clean out, and we had to spend some money to trash it out. And because of the big, heavy furniture that was in this, our trash out costs were about $1,100 just to clean it out. And then we had $3,800 in make-ready improvements. We had to get it painted, get it cleaned up. There was a little bit of appliance work that needed to be done. But it really suffered more from neglect and abandonment more than anything else. We did have a past due balance on the rents of $7,160. So this unit had a loss of $12,060. That's a significant loss across the 10 units. Now I get outside the units and I just look at what's on the grounds. The grounds were a complete mess. There was tires and hazardous material around on the grounds that cost us about $1,500 to clean up. That included some weed abatement, some cutting and trimming of what little bit of lawn was left there, and general trash removal. We spent about $2,800 fixing the violations that the state of Florida inspector had found, and we had to get that cured right away. We had to pay the licensing and the fees that had been unpaid. That was about $890. And then, to our surprise, there's also the typical house meter, the electric meter that's paid by the owner that takes care of the exterior lighting on the building, part of the safety features. The former manager had not had that on, so we had to turn that on, and then we found out the exterior light fixtures were broken or rotted and they needed repaired and replaced just to create a safe environment so if somebody came home after dark they could see the stairwell and they didn't feel like they were sneaking around the dark and had to run from their car to their apartment with a gun. They wanted to be safe in a well-lit environment. So that was $975. So you add another $6,165 to clean up the outside and bring it into compliance. When I add all this up, the unrealized rents over the previous year, the damages, the mess that had to be cleaned up, the repairs that had to be done because of the mismanagement, this owner had a loss in the previous year from this bad property manager of over $71,000. In fact, $71,501.17 was the total losses. That is astronomical. Now, I want to say this in defense of the owners because I've gotten to know them very well. They're wonderful people. They wanted to provide a good quality property. They were stuck in the middle of a pandemic situation, trusting what they thought was a professional property manager and the advice that he was giving them. They didn't know they had other options. They didn't know that they could still get tenants removed. They didn't know that they could still deal with these issues. They didn't know that they were being misled, lied to, and literally embezzled and ripped off by this property manager. Now, it saddens me that they were taken advantage of, but it also saddens me that somebody who would call themselves a property manager is out there giving this kind of bad reputation to such a wonderful professional industry. The moral to this story is, I want you as a property owner to properly vet your property managers. Make sure that you've got a real professional who's licensed, who's in compliance with local laws and regulations, and who knows how to handle tenants, because a good property manager doesn't manage property. A good property manager manages the people that are in the property. We don't want these kind of losses to happen to you. Now, we've got this resident, this property back in cash flow. It's earning about $8,000 a month in positive income now. The repairs, the expenses are behind us. The owners will be able to recover some of that on their taxes and hopefully recover something from the criminal investigation that's ongoing against the former property manager and the brokerage he worked for. The important thing now is the property cash flows. And we want yours to cash flow as well. So when you're looking for the right property manager, make sure you've got one who can deal with the difficult situations and be able to fix your property so that it gives you maximum income with minimal effort and you don't get lied to and taken advantage of like these owners were by a bad property manager. I'm Troy with IGC. I hope you've enjoyed this look at one of the worst cases of mismanagement that I've seen in my career, and I hope you're able to get something from it so that this never happens to you.